I don't think women should ever sell themselves short. And it's easy to do.
This is one of our first virtual installments of Pizza and Politics. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us. This is amazing.
I wish we could have virtual pizza.
I know, it's so unfortunate that we can't. We just wanted to start off by asking probably the most important question. How do you feel about pineapple pizza?
I'm always willing to have a bite of it, but it's not my favorite.
Yeah. So, just to start off, can you speak about what initially inspired you to get into the field of public service and run for Congress?
Well, it's a long history that I have. I think, first of all, my father was a career officer in the Air Force. He survived the bombing of Pearl Harbor, went on to serve throughout World War II, and then chose to stay in the United States Air Force. So I grew up in a setting in which service was, and to our country, was always an example. It was front and center in our household. And it was a commitment that my mother shared as well. I came of age, I was a teenager, just as John F. Kennedy was becoming our president. And for those of us who were in school at the time, he was a very inspirational president and certainly drew many of us who came from Republican households to the Democratic Party. So he was a great inspiration. And then while in college, towards the end of my years in college, I met my husband, Paul Tsongas, who was at the time interning in the office of the congressman who at that time represented Lowell. And Paul had a great passion to serve his country, serve his community, and I was drawn very much to that. So after I married him, we spent virtually our entire married life in politics in one way or another. He started out at the most local of levels in the city council. He made his way to county government. Then he was elected to Congress. Then he was elected to the United States president. And in 1992, he actually ran for president of the United States, not successfully, but he did run. And I was always very proud of his service and very much a part of his effort to serve. He passed away in 1997, and I went on to work at Middlesex Community College, where I eventually became a dean. And when this congressional seat opened up, the then Congressman Marty Meehan was going to become the chancellor of UMass Lowell. I made a decision in a split second to run. And I was motivated by two things. I understood the great, extraordinary opportunity to make a difference in this office. It's an opportunity that can be put to such great purpose, not always used as well as it should be, but it can be. And I'd seen that in my husband. But I was also motivated by the fact that Massachusetts had not elected a woman to Congress in 25 years. And in our history, prior to my running, we'd only elected 3. So I made a decision, we can't win if we don't run. And I determined right on that, as I said, a split second to run. And I was very fortunate to win. It wasn't easy. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, that first race for Congress. But we'll never have a chance to be part of it all if we're not willing to take that on. And I'm so grateful that I did, and that I was successful at it.
So after having served in Congress for 12 years, how did you come to your decision that it was time to leave office?
Well, it was a long time in the making, and it wasn't just about one thing. It was really about many things. I was fortunate to serve for 11 years, actually, and I felt like we'd made very good use of our time there. I was on the Armed Services Committee. We'd been able to have quite an impact, especially on the lives of women serving in the military. I thought we've been able to bring a lot to the city of Lowell and to the other communities that I represented throughout the first to fifth, and then it became the 3rd district. I was part of the historic effort to pass the Affordable Care Act and do so many, repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the military, and do many other things. So I felt I had accomplished what I set out for. I turned 70 in 2006, and that gets you to thinking. not 2006, 2016. That gets you to thinking about what next. And so I thought, you know, I've been so fortunate to be here, but is this the last thing that I want to do? No, I had grandchildren that I hadn't been able to spend time with. My children have been very much, lived such a public life with all that her father has done and then I was doing. I thought we needed a little more privacy. I when I first won, I won by 51%. By the time I ran the last time, I made my way up to about 68%. And in Lowell, I got 80% of the vote. I thought, I don't think I can ever do any better than that. So just for a whole host of reasons, I felt it was, and also when my husband first ran, we were part of a generational change. And we always went to bring about change. And my election as the first woman in 25 years certainly represented change. But I'd also seen Elizabeth Warren be elected. I was fortunate to succeed. Catherine Clark was elected. I knew that women would run to replace me, among others. So I felt confident that we'd brought about that kind of change and that women were ever more making their way into elective office at the highest of levels. So I felt that I'd accomplished something there. So everything just lined up that it was time for it to end. My biggest hesitation really was that Donald Trump was our president. But I did know that whoever ran and won and replaced me would ardently be able to take on the president and his decision making. And that was true in Lori Trahan as well.
So what would you say is the most rewarding part of public service and vice versa? What would you say is the most challenging part?
The most rewarding part is just the multitude of ways in which you can make a difference. So one of the things that most members of Congress do, and I think anybody in elective office, is we interact with constituents and we can be a resource to be helpful at our governmental level, whatever those issues might be. So as a member of Congress, we had many people come to us had problems around immigration, or veterans who were seeking some help, or seniors with Medicare and Social Security, or those in need through Medicaid. And we could be a resource. And the bottom line was, if we didn't do that job, we shouldn't be there. So we can help the individual. We can help communities to bring resources. We were able to do a lot for the city of Lowell and other communities as well, bringing federal dollars to help advance the community's vision for itself. There are a lot of organizations that also interface with the federal government, often advocating for particular public policy issues, and we can hear them out and try to be supportive when we're in agreement. And then we weigh in on the biggest of issues there are that this country confronts. So it's a tremendous opportunity to have influence on a multitude of levels. And I truly appreciated that. The hardest thing, I would say the hardest thing is just that it's extraordinarily demanding and not particularly well understood what we do. So the public doesn't always appreciate the challenges that we have to deal with in order to get our job done, nor does it necessarily respect those of us who are fortunate to hold public office. But be that as it may, our job is to communicate as best we can and to help connect the public with all the responsibilities and opportunities that public service provides at the federal level.
So you kind of touched upon this a little bit before, but you know, when you were first elected to Congress, you became the only female representative from Massachusetts, and looking at our delegation now with 4 female representatives, what are your thoughts on the increasing roles that women are taking in government, and what message do you have for any women who are considering running for office?
Well, one thing I always felt was it's the best possible way to live your life. Public service is simply the best possible way for me to live your life. It's just so unique. It's so multifaceted. It gives you so many opportunities to make a difference. Is it easy? No, it's not easy at all, but it's challenging, and it's challenging in a very exciting way. You constantly have to learn. I think it's so important for women to be part of our public conversation. First of all, we live in a highly complex world, and to exclude women, over 50% of the population, is to exclude a talent pool that we need. So we need all the talent we have to bring to bear on the issues we face, and women very much need to be a part of that. But the other reality is that if women are not at the table, then there are certain things that don't get addressed. So that lesson came home to me very early on as a new member of the House Armed Services Committee. That's the committee that oversees our military. I was in a hearing. We were talking about body armor. Now, body armor is something that we've put a lot of work into to help protect the soldier when they're in harm's way. But there are issues with it. It's very heavy. It can cause harm simply by virtue of wearing it. But in this hearing, we were just talking about all those issues. And by chance, because I was the only woman in the room, I said off the top of my head, have you ever developed body armor for women? And the answer was no. Well, 14% of our military is female, and that number keeps on growing. And so that year, in that year's defense bill, I put one line. We put one line tasking the services to develop body armor for women. And a year later, I was trying on some examples of it. So that question would probably not have been asked as I, as a woman, not been in that room to ask it. And had I not asked it, or some other follow-on woman had not asked it, I'm not sure women today now have body armor that suits their body, better protects them, and allows them to be safe when they're in harm's way.
Can you talk a little bit about your time in the Women's Caucus, and what did the work in that caucus entail? What was typically discussed?
The Women's Caucus was bipartisan, so that was very important in a Congress that is so partisan, as we know. So it brought us together on issues that impact women and children. I would have to say I did not participate in it as much as some, and we would take on a particular issue and try to study it and try to find a bipartisan way forward. I don't think we were always as successful as we would like to have been, because even though we're all women, we also come from different parties, and our points of view tend to shape, and our parties and their points of view often shape the way we consider a way to address an issue. But it was an opportunity at least to come together in a more routine way and get to know those across the aisle, get to know each other from across the aisle. It's probably one of the most important functions it performed.
Again, you were talking about this a little bit earlier, but you mentioned how sometimes constituents don't always fully understand what Congresspeople put into their work. So what would you say is the biggest misconception about how politics work in general?
That's a good question. It's a very good question, and I think often it's not particularly well understood just how challenging it is and just what a commitment it requires. That most people who are elected to office are good people. They're well-intentioned. They go, not everybody. They're well-intentioned. They go with a desire to make a difference. They take their job seriously. They learn the issues as we have to deal with them, because new issues constantly crop up. And they work hard at trying to do the right thing. So I think that because there is this conception that sort of makes it harder for people to appreciate just what a challenge it is, and what it requires of those of us who are fortunate to be elected. On the other hand, we seek it out. This is a job we want. We don't want anybody thinking that it's, we want this opportunity, or we wouldn't work as hard as we do at getting elected and getting reelected over and over and over again. So whatever the misconceptions, we're more than willing to live with them in order to have the opportunity to make a difference for our communities.
Given how polarized politics have become lately, how difficult would you say it is to get laws and acts passed that both parties agree on?
There are a lot of things that you can get done sort of below the radar. So, we often focus our attention on the big issues where the differences can be deep, and getting to yes, very challenging. But what I found, and this was especially on all the work that I did on sexual assault, I found a partner on the other side of the aisle, a gentleman from Ohio, Congressman Mike Turner. He and I together worked over the course of, let me think, I would say 8 or 9 years to address that issue. And we always found a common way forward, year after year after year after year. There were some things we could never agree on, and we set those aside and just agreed to disagree. And then we looked for all the ways in which we did agree and could continue to make a difference on this issue. And so I imagine across Congress, there are those kinds of partnerships across the aisle where people are making a difference. It's not as though you write one big law that fixes everything overnight. What you tend to do is chip away at it. So one year you'll fix one thing, and then the next year you'll fix something else, and then the next year you'll fix something else. And when you're through, it amounts to what one law would have done. But rather than try to do it all at once, you do it piecemeal. And I think, one, by doing it piecemeal, you're not asking for so much change overnight. And number two, by doing piecemeal, you're better able to understand what the challenges are. And I think it also helped to foster the bipartisanship that we were able to practice throughout my tenure and my work with Congressman Turner. So there are many instances where we are able to have success, but on the big issues, it is not easy. The differences are big. And my hope is that under President Biden, we will be able to find ways down that find a common path on some of these bigger issues.
Indeed.
I had read that you had opened the first all-female law practice in Lowell, which is incredible. So what inspired you to pursue that, and why do you think it's important to include more representation within law and government?
Well, when I first went to law school, I first was admitted to law school in 1970. I applied to law school. At the time, I applied to Boston University Law School. I just moved to Lowell because I'd married Paul Tsongas. And Boston University was one of the very few law schools that was admitting women in any significant number. They had about a quarter of their class. Harvard maybe had 2 women in their whole class. So I was very fortunate to, and Boston College, probably very few as well. So Boston University was really in the forefront, and I was fortunate to be able to go there. I went for about a year, and then I dropped out and went back in 1984 and eventually got my law degree. And at the time, again, because women were just really making their way into law, I thought it was important to have an all-female law practice. Now, I have to tell you, it was just 2 of us. So we're not talking anything major here. And we did what all lawyers do who have their own little practice. As I said, we took whatever walked in the door. We did some family law. We did some work with the small and large businesses. We did some real estate law. And so the work we did was really no different than what any young man starting out would have been doing. But my partner and I at the time just felt it was important to have an all-female law practice, because women then were really just making their way into the legal careers in any significant number.
In your experience, is it ever frustrating to not always be able to see the changes that you want to see And how would you move past that?
Rome wasn't built in a day. Change is not a simple thing. And we are a highly complex society facing very complicated issues. So I accept, and maybe it's just the reality of being the age that I now am, that these things do take time. But I do see change come. And but again, it just requires steady work. You have to be engaged. It doesn't happen without being engaged. Uh, so, which the lesson to young people, I think, is that whatever change you seek, uh, sometimes you can do it from the outside by challenging the sort of the forces that be, but in the end, it's making your way into the inside, into office, where you really have the ability to affect change. And but again, it can't be done overnight. And sometimes when it's done overnight, it's not the best anyway, because the issues are too complicated to think through every little piece of it. But for example, I was very lucky when I was first elected to Congress to vote on a bill that would have tried to address climate change. And we passed it in the House of Representatives, and it never went anywhere in the Senate. And one of my great regrets as a member of Congress was not having been able to pass legislation that would address climate change in any significant way. Things were happening under the radar screen, but not to the degree that we needed. And so now we have, again, in President Biden, President-elect Biden, a president who understands the great challenge it poses to the globe. You have a Democratic House, you will have a Democratic Senate, and I do believe there are more Republicans who understand what a threat it poses. So hopefully we will see some more comprehensive legislation to help address it. But that's an example of an issue that's been very frustrating. We should have been addressing this 30 years ago. And we've waited an awfully long time. It's going to be hard to roll back some of the effects of climate change, but we certainly can't let it go unabated.
And climate change is a priority for a lot of my generation as well. So it's really great to hear that Congress is starting to take it a bit more seriously.
Well, it's going to require people, young people like you, being very vocal and continuing to put pressure on your elected representatives. It's not, it, yes, some members will come with a deep passion for that issue, but there are others who will waffle a bit. Now, I have to say that at the state legislature level, Tom Golden, our local state representative, just played a very important role in crafting legislation to deal with it at the state level. But we need much more work at the federal level, comprehensive across the country, and also to go back to being a member of the Paris Climate Accords.
And so we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. Why do you think students should take the time out of their busy schedules to familiarize themselves with how the government works?
First of all, you'll have a ball. It is so much fun to get involved in campaigns. I have to say my very first campaign was for a man who was running for president. I was in college. Eugene McCarthy was challenging, he was a Democrat, challenging our then sitting Democratic president, Lyndon Johnson, over the issue of the Vietnam War. So the issue itself was quite important, but I made my way up to New Hampshire, where we were having presidential primaries, and just to participate it, see the energy that comes to it, the passion that people bring to their involvement, and the people you meet who have this shared convictions. It's fun. It's fun. You can't always win. My first candidate lost. Then when I married my husband, Paul, he was running for the city council in Lowell. And I went door to door all over Lowell, knocking on doors for Paul. And that was fun because you meet people, you learn more, you learn about the issues in their lives, the challenges they have. You meet some wonderfully nice people. You meet a few people who aren't so happy to see you knocking on their door, but nevertheless, that's democracy in action. And I enjoyed it. And even running for Congress, as hard as it was, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the intellectual challenge of it. I enjoyed meeting people who cared about what happens in our country, and just the diversity of places that I came to represent. And then the wonderful people who helped me, both my staff and volunteers. You just meet some great, great people. And I think it activates your belief in our country. You may have it in the abstract, but when you're out there working with people who care so much, care passionately, you see it firsthand. So it's a wonderful way to live your life. It's just a wonderful way to live your life. And even if you don't run for office, there are lots of ways to make a difference. Everybody doesn't have to run for office, but there are lots of other ways where you can have influence in your community, and those are worth pursuing as well. Well, one thing I would add, my very first elections actually were running for student government.
Really?
So, oh yes, I ran for class whatever. I was vice president of my student council. Yeah, I was involved in numerous organizations, often an officer. That's where you begin. I mean, that's where you begin. You test yourself out. That's where you assert your leadership. That's where you develop your skills of working with people. And you don't have to start at the highest of levels. There are lots of ways to begin. And for students, I think simply getting involved in their activities within their schools is a wonderful way to start.
This is kind of going a bit off script, but I'm just wondering, was it ever like intimidating at first to like have these higher up roles in positions, especially as like vice president of your student body, having, or even like intimidating or overwhelming? Did you ever have that type of experience?
You know, my biggest regret was when I was running for student council office, that I didn't run for president, that I decided to run for vice president. So I'm glad to see we have a vice president elect in this country. My guess is she will someday seek to be president. There is a stepping stone sometime, but I don't think women should ever sell themselves short. And it's easy to do. I once had dinner with one of our justices of the United States Supreme Court, who is a woman, and she said she often felt like she didn't belong there. She doubted herself. And that's something that I think young women, and obviously not such young women, sometimes have to labor with that feeling. But the reality is, we belong there just as much as our male colleagues. And we earn it. You have to earn it. It doesn't, no one hands it to you. You have to earn it. And once you earn it, then you have to develop the skill set to do it right and do it well.